Fáilte Akara. Welcome, friend, to the Ogham Academy. I am Lora O'Brien, Masters in Irish History, and today we are uncovering the real story of Ogham. This is an ancient Irish script or alphabet that has sparked the curiosity of historians, mystics, gamers, and Eurovision fans alike. So, what exactly is Ogham? This is an ancient Irish alphabet. So Ogham is spelled Ogham in modern Irish, and in older Irish, it's Ogam. So you will see both spellings, and both are correct. It is an early Irish writing system that's found inscribed on stones throughout Ireland and sometimes along Britain's west coast and into Scotland. The name origin of the word Ogham has a very hazy etymology. Nobody's really sure, though there may be some link to the Proto-Celtic term ogmo, meaning furrow. So if you are familiar with the Ogham script, then you will notice that there are lines carved, basically, is how we would write Ogham. So there are 25 characters and 5 groups. Ogham's 25 characters are called Fi. So the letters would be called Fi, that's F-I-D. And this would mean trees. So there is a tree association with Ogham, but not every Ogham Fi has a tree associated with it. The letters themselves can mean many things, from an iron rod to a hazel, so there is a good range, but there are actually more different meanings for the Ogham letters than there are actual trees associated with them. Now, the alphabet is collectively known as Be, Lish, Nin. So that is the first the first 2 letters of the first grouping, or ACMA, and the last letter. So of the first 5 grouping, that is 1, 2, and 5. And as I said, each of these letters are divided into 5 groups. So that is ACMA, singular, A-I-C-M-E, or ACME, plural. And each of these has 5 characters. Now, I said 25. Originally, there were 20. We'll get into that in a little bit, but there were 5, possibly 6, added later. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. So the vowels occupy the 4th group. They're run together in the 4th ACMA. And the 5th group then is a later addition, as I mentioned. So we will talk about that. Now, how Ogham works, it is the position of Ogham matters. So each Ogham Fi is made up of notches or strokes around a central line, which is often called the stem line. And the position of the notches or the strokes determines the sound the character represents. And when you're reading Ogham, you would read vertically, traditionally. In the oldest versions of it, it was always vertical. And this would be from bottom to top, okay? So later then we get into the horizontal reading. So the vertical reading would usually be along stone edges, possibly on wooden tallies, which haven't survived. The stone has survived a lot easier, of course, than wood, which would break down much quicker. But later then in the manuscripts, we get the horizontal reading of it, and it does run from left to right along this horizontal line. So still the same stem line, but just on stone edges. In the older tradition, it goes from bottom to top, and in the manuscripts, it goes from left to right. Now, the tree meanings and names, there is in every popular New Age attempt to work with Ogham, what you're going to get is connections to the so-called Celtic tree calendar, doing bunny ears there, which is not a thing, unfortunately. Well, it is a thing, but it's a made-up thing. It's not a traditional Irish thing at all. And this popular tradition claims, as I said, that all Ogham letters are named for trees, but Really, they're not. So, as I said, you could get everything from gold to everyday items as actual meanings for the letters. Now, there is an association list for trees in one of the manuscript sources. So that has kind of grown legs and become the only thing Ogham is known for with trees. However, there are also association lists for famous forts around Ireland, for colours, for artisan and craftsmanship skills, for look, there's even a pig Ogham. Okay, so trees are a part of the Ogham tradition, certainly. However, they are not the be all and end all, and it's a lot more complicated than some people would have you believe, right? So, the legendary origins and mythic creators of Ogham. We have, again, through our manuscript tradition, we have a record of a person called Phineas Farsa. So, in one tale, this legendary linguist collected knowledge from the world's languages, perfected Irish, the Irish language, Gaeilge, and invented Ogham to express the sounds of this perfect language as its perfect alphabet. But there is another story which connects it to one of the Tuatha Danann called Ogma or Oma. And this is a pre-Christian deity of eloquence and martial valor. So he was known for his prowess with writing, with speaking, but also he was a warrior champion of the Tuatha Danann and a brother of the Dagda. So the first inscription legend we have in the Ogham tract says that Oma's first Ogham message was carved on birch, which is connected to the first Ogham letter or fee, which is Beth. And this carving contained 7 B characters, which warned of a fairy abduction unless birch was offered as protection. So again, looking back through the source material that we do have a practical source for Ogham, I suppose, even if it is something that maybe medieval scribes have put together, because there is biblical influence in that first story with Phineas Farsa as well. And maybe they put it together because they wanted to equate themselves with the classical traditions that they would have been very familiar with. So they valued Ogham so strongly that they, put it up there, the origin story, as an expression of this perfect language as its perfect alphabet. But there are also deeper and possibly older mythological roots and associations with it as well, including protection magic, as we saw in the inscription legend with Oma, including connections to the other world, including the use of it possibly in a spell context or in even a divination context. So that all does form part of the legendary origins and mythic creators of Ogham. But in the actual historical and archaeological tradition, what we're dealing with really is 2 main periods. So we have classical Ogham and reformed Ogham. They're called many different things. The classical or orthodox or monumental period will often be dated from either the 4th or the 5th century to the 7th century. Now, the original date of Ogham we'll maybe get to in a minute, but certainly this is what we can verify. Okay, so from at least the late 300s to the early 400s, we had Ogham being inscribed on stones as part of this classical, orthodox, or monument tradition, right? So most surviving Ogham stones date from here and are inscribed with what is referred to academically as primitive Irish, but is one of our earliest forms, or the earliest form of the Irish language, or Gaeilge, that we still speak on the island today. Now, while the 3rd century is potential, definitely, such as older letters like ua, getal, and streif were already fading by the time the earliest stones were carved. So some of the sounds that the Ogham represents were not hugely relevant or present in the language, even by the time we can date to this, the earliest of these classical period Ogham stones. What that means is that it's probably older, honestly. And you will see some academics like David Stifter, who is one of the world's experts on Ogham, and particularly the linguistics of Ogham. You will see quotes from him that say something akin to it could be as early as the 1st century. So that would be, I can't remember the exact quote, but that is in his book, Ogham, Language, Writing, and Epigraphy. Epigraphy? Epigraphy, I suppose, would be how we would say that word. Apologies. And then we move from there into the Reformed, the Scholastic, or the manuscript period or tradition, which begins early 8th century, so 700s Common Era. And the emphasis here moves to manuscripts and new varieties of Ogham alphabets. And then we have later editions. As we mentioned, there was a whole set of later letters which were added in to accommodate Latin, Greek, and foreign sounds, which were not present in the native tradition. So was Ogham influenced by Latin? Definitely. And again, particularly as we move through time, the Latin alphabet, the sounds of the Latin alphabet would have been very much in the purview of the people who were writing about the Ogham in the classical, the Reformed, the Scholastic, and the manuscript tradition, because these were all monasteries. These were monks. Of course, they knew Latin. Of course, they were writing in Latin, as well as Irish and as well as English in some cases. So Latin was the dominant script in Western Europe at the time. And Ogham's core structure does closely align with an alphabet system, certainly when we move into these later versions of it. However, it is much more than just a Latin cipher. So the original Oghams 20, feda is the plural, F-E-D-A. So the 20 letters, or feda, were specifically designed, as I mentioned, for these primitive Irish sounds, not merely just recoded Latin. So language evolves as we go through time. Of course it does. We're talking centuries here. So the common use of language, the setting the standards that would have been happening in the monastic period would have influenced how Ogham was being used, because it was still a very active part of these people's scholastic studies. They were very proud of it. They really viewed the Ogham as part of their identity, their core identity as Irish. In fact, I did my entire master's thesis to explore the idea of whether Ogham was a part of the formation of Irish identity, which would have had its roots in these monastic medieval scholastic cultures, certainly. But then I explored it as we moved through time, particularly post-colonization. Now Ireland is still colonized. We still have the northern part of our island is still in foreign power hold. So we are not post-colonial, but part of the island obviously became post-colonial. And the whole idea with the revolution, with the Reformation, with the development then of an Irish identity, which had been brutally forced from us for 700-800 years, even up to 1,000 years at that point. was a very interesting question to me. Obviously, I wrote a whole thesis about it. You can actually find that thesis if you are interested. You can find that thesis and the conclusions I came to. Spoiler alert, yes, Ogham was actually and still is part of our Irish cultural and heritage identity. So it is very important to me, to us as a people. Generally, of course, not every Irish person even knows what Ogham is, but it's on our passports, so we see it every time we travel. At least, we see it regularly in our culture and in our country. So it's all in there. It's all in there at the back of the brain and in the heart and in the spirit, even if it's not a conscious part of people's everyday lives here. And for some of us it really is a part of our conscious everyday lives. Now I am getting way off topic here, but I suppose I do want to point out that one of our most famous Ogham scholars, Professor Damien McManus, said that no scholar who has argued for the introduction of Ogham to Ireland has made a convincing argument, nor supplied a single piece of reliable evidence to support it. Now, what this is referring to is very much along the lines of the question that comes up so often, because Ogham has been found outside of Ireland. It comes up very often as to whether Ogham is actually Irish. Who invented it, right? So the evidence is very clear, and as Professor McManus said, there is no evidence that has been presented that makes sense that the Ogham was invented or even used anywhere outside of Ireland that didn't have a strong Irish presence. So where you'll see it most is outside of the island is, say, in Wales, where the Irish would have traveled and set up colonies, let's call it what it was at the time, and various parts of Britain. I get emails regularly about people believe that they have found Ogham in America, and unless the Irish traveled there as well, which maybe, Brendan the Voyager is a part of our mythic history at least. So possibly the Irish traveled to the continent of America, or Turtle Island as the natives call it, and brought Ogham with them. But there has been, again, no evidence at all that has been found, despite some people really, really wanting that to be true. Unfortunately, it's not. So what was it actually being used for? So within this classical monumental period, with the Ogham stones and the carving, it was typically commemorative monuments. So a person's name, parentage, tribal affiliation. Some would have occupations, such as Lugh the poet or Ronan the priest. And there is obviously convergence then with the Christian tradition, where sometimes we see very Christian influenced carving as well, side by side with Ogham, either in what the Ogham is saying or in decoration and iconography as well, that is part of the Christian tradition. But again, Ogham was here previous to Christianity, I believe, and many scholars believe, and would have developed side by side with Christianity. So of course, now this does not prove that Ogham was Christian, just because there is, Christian iconography that is associated with Ogham. The same way having Latin influence in it does not prove that Ogham was just a Latin cipher, because it would have been much older than that, and the evidence for that is very clear. So within the manuscripts, then, what we have is everything from margin notes and jokes. A really common one that goes around is internet in meme form is a little piece of Ogham, which was written in the margin of a bigger manuscript, completely unrelated to Ogham, which basically translates as "the ale killed me." So some poor scribe was hung over to feck, and as he was doing his work the next morning, this was his doodling in the manuscript margins. But besides all that, what we do have is three major texts which deal with Ogham, and this is our primary record of the manuscript tradition of Ogham. One would be the Scholar's Primer, one would be the Book of Ballymote, and one would be the Ogham Tract, which contains over 100 Ogham alphabets. So again, with the manuscript tradition, we had people experimenting with Ogham and using it and evolving it in whatever way that made sense to them. So these were recorded and gathered in a manuscript called the Ogham Tract, section within a manuscript called the Ogham Tract. So we also know that Ireland's medieval poets studied the Ogham varieties in their early training. There's record of that as well. And we're very fond of it. And again, you know, it continued to be used monumentally as well on gravestones and on monuments, even through the manuscript tradition, although the primary use of that would have been in the classical or monumental tradition. So there are maybe other variants that have come about, and again, this is an evolving in places where there was a very strong Irish presence. So the Ogham then would be part of the local culture and got kind of mixed in, say in Scotland, got mixed in with Pictish. So there is a type of Pictish Ogham which is found in eastern and northern Scotland, but the inscriptions often appear unintelligible or weathered. And scholars will even debate if the underlying language is Pictish. It's more likely to be P-Celtic, which is the other branch of the Celtic languages from Irish, or something else entirely maybe. But they do follow the same kind of monumental tradition of commemorating names or boundaries. So it would often be, you know, X son of Y, which would associate a particular person who this monument is dedicated to. But often the placing of these stones, and you'll see this really commonly with Ogham stones in Ireland, where we have access to them in their original positions. Unfortunately, a lot of Ogham stones have been picked up and used as lintels in churches, or moved to different locations where they're more convenient on people's land, or used to build houses, or all of these things. So we have lost a lot of Ogham stones. And then sometimes when we will be examining built heritage, you will find an Ogham inscription that is a testament to a much older and probably different placing of the Ogham stone that was just then reused or recycled. I believe they were seen as good luck. If there was an Ogham carving on a stone, and then you would use that as part of a building project, this was seen as good luck or protection. And one of the reasons for that is because the Ogham stones were originally at boundaries. Now, and think back to the original application of Ogham with those 7 Bs, or 7 Beth, where it was seen as a protective influence. So I believe that tradition kept down. And you will see a lot of scholars, particularly Christian scholars, who really don't want to give any credence to the idea that, like, the Druids used Ogham stones, or Ogham language even, that Ogham divination, which is very popular, is, that there's no kind of official record for it. Now, what we do have is many official accounts, or many historical accounts, or manuscript sources, which would talk about divination methods within the native Irish traditions, certainly. So we know that divination was a thing. We have staves or sticks or tallies being used as part of the divination process. To me, it makes sense that the Ogham would be part of that, especially given what survived then in the manuscript tradition of all the associations with it. But there's no clear divination structure or guide in the original source materials. So what I and many people like me have done is to take the original evidence that we do have, both by studying native divination traditions, by intensively studying the Ogham, all of the associations that we have access to, and also then by personal exploration through methods like guided journeying, and have put together basically divination keys for each Ogham. So I would have my own series of divination meanings for the Ogham. Now, if you want to access this, there is a free guide at the Ogham Academy, which includes a summing up of this, of each Ogham letter or fee or the feather, plural. So it is, I think it's either a 7 or a 9-page guide. Anyway, I'll put a link below if you want just the visuals for this. You want to see what the letters look like. You want a little bit of this history in printed format. And you maybe want to experiment with maybe drawing some of these Ogham letters onto cards and using them for divination yourself. Now, we do have a video on the channel as well about making a set of cards, which also could be a set of staves or sticks that you carve Ogham into. It's up to you. But there is a whole, I'll link that video at the end of this video. So make sure that you watch the end and there'll be a little clickable link to it, okay? So after all this, why does the Ogham matter? You know, I've explained a little bit about my explorations with the and original research with the thesis that I did, which proved a very definitive correlation between this development of Irish identity at a time when we were really lost and rootless. We looked to our pagan traditions in a lot of cases, which were seen as our native traditions or our indigenous traditions. And we look to this for inspiration at the very least. And many of the top scholars who would have been involved with the Irish Revolution, such as, well, Owen MacNeill would be the most obvious one. He was very heavily involved with the 1916 Rising and the Revolution, but he was also a professor, and Ogham was one of his study or focus subjects. He wrote books on the topic. He wrote papers. You can still access papers online by Owen MacNeill, which talk about Ogham. Now, some of the academic work is dated, obviously, but if you're looking for more modern scholars, you have Damien McManus or David Stifter. So I'll put some resources below if you want to go and look up some books, please do. But here in Ireland, this is our first Irish writing system. So it's the earliest script to record the Irish language. So please remember that Ogham is not a language in itself. It is a script, an alphabet. It is an expression of our language. So to work with the Ogham, and what you really need to do if you wanted to do a piece of writing, say in Ogham, what you would have to do, I mean, practically even what you would have to do, because a lot of the letters that we would use in English are simply not present in Irish, such as J, K, W, etc. And what you would have to do then is to actually translate the word that you want to work with into the Irish language, and then transliterate, it's called, so literally write it out in Ogham then. So Ogham is not a language in itself. But there is this evidence through the Ogham of this dynamic cultural exchange. So Ireland was never isolated or backward, and a lot of our colonization history has given us an ingrained almost shame of Irish culture, because for centuries it was literally baited out of us, murdered because of it. Parents even started to uh, take this into themselves and make sure that their children only spoke English. Children were being beaten in schools for speaking the Irish language. And a lot of that language around how that was being used, how Irish was being othered, was that it was savage, barbaric, and again, this isolated and backward notion that we have, where actually, when you look at the historical evidence, without maybe that unbiased colonial lens, because remember, a lot of our Irish history was done by Protestant academics in the Protestant ascendancy within our culture. So this is the upper echelons of Irish culture, say through the 16th, 17th, 18th, even into the 19th century. The 19th century, the 1800s here in Ireland was a whole mixed bag because of other reasons, the Great Famine and all the rest of it, and which we never call the potato famine, by the way. It's just not the done thing. So what we have then is these people who are viewing Ireland and our native culture, our native history, our native traditions through a very biased lens of this brainwashing that they've had, that the Irish are backwards, savage, uncultured, uncouth, dangerous, all of this. So what the Ogham actually proves, as we look at its history, is that we weren't isolated. We traveled, we exchanged, we provided cultural exchange. And we know this from other parts of our history as well, and other archaeological evidence from all around the world. And we were definitely not backward. We had this beautiful, wonderful, evolving linguistic tradition, which was also a script, which the Ogham is so much more than an alphabet as well, I believe. And also then the adaptability of the Irish, which is really how we survived, and how our culture and how our identity actually made it through all of those years of horror and war and all the rest of it. Is the adaptability of the Irish, and the way that we were able to incorporate Latin in, we were able to incorporate the Christian traditions in, and make this beautiful syncretic blend, which still to this day, with our folklore, with our mythology, with our native source material that we have as part of our living traditions today. Everything from healers and folk magic to the mythology, to the Tuatha De Danann, to the our old beautiful, beautiful stories that we have here in Ireland. And it is this living tradition. So although the popularity waned maybe after the 7th century, the knowledge of Ogham never died. Scribes, scholars, and even curious novices continued using it well into the late medieval era and even beyond. So obviously, we have examples of the Ogham up to the 17th century, and again, scholars then were studying it through the 18th and 19th centuries. That's the period that I based my thesis on. And it was still having this huge influence within our culture, within our identity. And again, 20th and 21st century, here we are. You've gotten to the end of a very long video about the Ogham, by an Ogham scholar who is also a practicing Draoi, which is a practitioner of native magic here in Ireland. And I'm here, I run the Ogham Academy, I run the Mórrígan Academy, I run the Irish Pagan School, but everything that I do and everything that we teach through all of those schools, organizations, institutions is very much rooted in our academic studies, in our living traditions. It's authentic connection to Ireland. So that's what we're doing. So thank you so much for joining me here at the Ogham Academy for this video podcast. And I hope that this exploration of Ogham has shed some light on its fascinating origins, its uses across the centuries, and even the myths and mythology and the magic that is still part of the Ogham culture and this living tradition. So if today's little journey through the Ogham piqued your interest, your curiosity, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, leave me a comment below if you have any questions, and I would love to answer them in future videos. And make sure that you pick up the links and the resources. You can watch that video, it should be here somewhere, and you can watch that video and make your own set of Ogham cards if that appeals to you as well. But please do check back in, get that free guide from the Ogham Academy as well, because well, it's completely free, and it will give you very practical usage for the Ogham, as well as some of this information in printed format, so you can refer back to it later. So thank you for your time, and slán go fóill. I will see you in the next video.